Hello there, and welcome back to The Sleepy Scientist, where curiosity is always welcome, but yawning is practically encouraged. Whether you're tucked under blankets, listening with your eyes closed, or just floating gently through your nighttime routine, I'm so glad you're here. Now, I should probably warn you, this video might be dangerously fascinating. I'll do my best to keep things calm and cozy, but if it turns out to be just a little too interesting and you stay awake, well, at least you'll drift off knowing why the extinction of trilobites eventually led to TikTok. Before we gently tumble into the deep time of Earth's past, if you find yourself enjoying this relaxed stroll through the fossil record, I'd be ever so grateful if you tapped the like button or subscribed. It helped the channel stay afloat like a sleepy ammonite bobbing along a prehistoric sea. And while we're here, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're in a snowy town where mammoths once wandered, or perhaps somewhere balmy and ancient where dinosaurs once strolled through ferns. I'd love to know your local time too. Is it just past 10 and you're winding down? Or 2 in the morning and you're wide awake trying everything but counting sheep? Feel free to share in the comments below. It's always a joy to hear where these sleepy science stories are being heard. Alright, if you're all settled in and ready, let's dim the lights on today and take a quiet little journey backwards, not just in time, but through some of the most dramatic disappearances life has ever known. Because sometimes, strangely enough, the end is exactly how everything else begins. Let's begin with a curious thought. What does it actually mean for a species to go extinct? The word itself has a kind of finality to it, a gentle yet solemn bell tolling for a creature that will never be seen again. Dinosaurs, dodos, mammoths, trilobites. Each name carries with it a shadow of something that once thrived, breathed, and blinked in the sunlight, and is now, well, entirely gone. Extinction is often treated like a tragedy, and to be fair, on a case-by-case basis, it certainly can be, especially when human activity is involved. But take a wider step back. Imagine a timeline stretching not just thousands or millions, but billions of years. Viewed from that high up, extinction isn't so much a tragedy as it is a rhythm, a beat in the strange and ever-changing song of life. By definition, extinction is the end of a species, when the last living member of a group dies and no one is left to carry on the lineage. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a quiet vanishing act. No explosions, no meteorites. Just a slow dwindling until eventually nothing remains but fossils and maybe a wistful mention in a biology textbook. But extinctions don't all happen on the same scale. Biologists make a distinction between 2 main types: background extinction and mass extinction. Background extinction is the usual everyday kind. It's the low-level, humdrum backdrop of life's drama. Over time, some species just fail to keep up. Maybe their habitat changes, maybe they fall behind in the evolutionary arms race, or maybe they just draw the short straw of existence. This is happening all the time. Right now, as you listen to this, a few obscure beetles or fungi may quietly be bowing out forever. No headlines, no farewell parties, just gone. Then there's mass extinction, the big dramatic curtain drops. These are rare, catastrophic events where huge numbers of species disappear in a relatively short period of geological time. Not just one unlucky beetle or bird, but often 70% or more of all life on Earth. That's like cleaning out the entire cast and starting over with a few scrappy extras. So how common is extinction really? Let's put it this way. Over 99% of all species that have ever existed on this planet are now extinct. Think about that. Every plant, animal, fungus and microbe you know today is just the tiniest sliver, the surviving tip of a vast ancient iceberg of life. And that iceberg has been slowly melting for 4.5 billion years. Life began on Earth at least 3.5 billion years ago. For the first couple of billion years, it was mostly microbial, tiny, single-celled organisms swimming around in oceans that smelled like sulfur and mystery. Multicellular life didn't really kick off until at about 600 million years ago. From there, evolution began cranking out more complex creatures at an increasingly dazzling pace. jellyfish, trilobites, ferns, amphibians, dinosaurs, mammals, flowers. It was a constant humming workshop of invention. But evolution doesn't just invent, it edits. And one of its most powerful tools is extinction. Extinction. It might seem harsh, this business of wiping out entire lineages, but nature isn't particularly sentimental. If an organism can't adapt to changing circumstances, it's replaced, not out of cruelty, but because life is always reshaping itself to fit its environment. Every extinction opens a gap, and in those gaps, new life can flourish. Here's a simple analogy. Imagine a crowded city street where every shop is rented and every corner is bustling. Then suddenly, a whole row of businesses shuts down. It's sad, yes, but now there's room for new ideas. A bakery replaces a tailor. A bookstore takes the place of a cobbler. In biological terms, that's called adaptive radiation, when a species or group of species rapidly diversifies to fill ecological roles that have been vacated. Let's take a real-world example. When the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct about 66 million years ago, it wasn't just the end of the T-Rex and its friends. It was also the beginning of a golden age for mammals. With the great reptiles gone, niches opened up everywhere. Forest floors, open plains, treetops, and mammals, previously small, mostly nocturnal and generally unimpressive, exploded into a kaleidoscope of forms. Rodents, primates, whales, bats, cats, and eventually a strange two-legged creature with a habit of staring at the stars. But even before that grand dinosaur departure, extinctions were shaping life in powerful ways. Around 250 million years ago, the Permian extinction, sometimes called the Great Dying, wiped out over 90% of marine species and 70% of land vertebrates. That's as close as life has ever come to being entirely erased. And yet, out of that desolation came the ancestors of dinosaurs and later, mammals. Without that grim interlude, who knows what the dominant life form today might be? There's another layer to this though, a slightly spooky one. Many extinctions aren't caused by gradual environmental change. Some are fast, very fast. We're talking asteroids strike fast, supervolcano fast, climate chaos fast. When these happen, even well-adapted species can be swept away. It's like flipping the table during a chess game and starting over. And yet, from the ashes, life rebuilds. It always does. Evolution doesn't skip a beat, it just hums a new tune. There's something quietly profound in that. Extinction isn't an error in the system, it is the system. It's not just about endings, it's about the creative potential that follows. Without extinction, evolution might stagnate. The world could be locked into a single stale pattern of life. Instead, it pulses with change. Every creature alive today is a survivor, the product of untold generations of winners in the game of adaptation. But that winning streak doesn't last forever. Sooner or later, every lineage reaches a dead end, and that's okay, because that's how space is made for something new. So what is extinction really? It's the quiet closing of one chapter so another can be written. Sometimes with an exclamation mark, sometimes with a whisper, but always with the potential for something extraordinary to come next. And maybe, as you rest here tonight, listening to the long history of loss and renewal, you can take comfort in that. In the strange, almost poetic certainty that from every ending, life begins again. Let's take a slow and thoughtful walk through the grand catastrophes of deep time. Not just little bumps in the road, but full-scale cosmic car crashes, events so powerful, so sweeping that they didn't just change the course of life on Earth, they hit the reset button on evolution itself. These are the mass extinctions, the Great Five, the rare moments in Earth's long history when extinction wasn't just happening in the background, quietly picking off unlucky species, but crashing through the door with a megaphone and a flamethrower. They are like the punctuation marks in the book of life, massive, jarring, sometimes brutal full stops, followed by entirely new chapters. Scientists recognize 5 of these major extinction events. There may be more, and some would argue that we're living through a 6th one right now, but let's not rush ahead. For now, let's visit each of the big 5 Darwin order. You might want to imagine yourself drifting through a dreamy time machine, slowly coasting over eons, with soft cosmic elevator music playing in the background. Every now and then, boom! The music skips, the lights flicker, and a whole lot of species check out permanently. We begin with the end Ordovician extinction, around 445 million years ago. The Ordovician period was a time when life had finally gotten its sea legs, so to speak. Most living creatures were marine, things like trilobites, brachiopods, and there's world's first coral reefs. The continents were mostly clustered near the equator, and vertebrates hadn't yet figured out how to walk on land. Then came a sudden ice age, likely triggered by the rise of the Appalachian Mountains, which pulled carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and cooled the planet. Ocean levels dropped, habitats vanished, cold-sensitive species suffered, and then, just to make things extra difficult, the climate reversed again. The ice melted rapidly, causing sea levels to surge and oxygen levels to crash. It was a 1-2 punch that wiped out about 85% of marine species. It was the second deadliest extinction event in Earth's history, and most people have never even heard of it. Poor Ordovician, no blockbuster movies about trilobites running from glaciers. Next up, about 70 million years later, came the late Devonian extinction, around 375 million years ago. This one wasn't a single dramatic event, but more of a slow-motion crisis spread out over 20 million years or more. Like a pot slowly coming to a boil, unnoticed until everything inside is already half-cooked. The Devonian was known as the Age of Fishes, and the oceans were teeming with jawed and jawless fish, armoured placoderms, and strange early sharks. On land, the first forests were beginning to take shape, lush, leafy, and busy photosynthesizing their little hearts out. But forests, it turns out, were both a blessing and a bit of a curse. As plants spread across the land, they sucked carbon dioxide from the air and released oxygen. Great for future humans, not so great for Devonian sea creatures. The changing chemistry of the oceans may have triggered widespread anoxia, zones of water with little or no oxygen. Combine that with possible volcanic activity and rapid changes in sea levels, and the result was a long, messy decline in biodiversity. Roughly 75% of marine species disappeared. Now we arrive at the biggest showstopper of them all, the end Permian extinction, also known as the Great Dying. This one occurred about 252 million years ago and earns its dramatic nickname. It was quite simply the worst thing that ever happened to life on Earth. Imagine, if you will, a planet where over 90% of all marine species and 70% of land vertebrates just vanish. What caused it? A perfect storm of awfulness. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia pumped enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. This led to extreme global warming, acid rain, and ocean acidification. Some scientists believe the warming was so intense that it destabilized methane clathrates, ice-like structures at the bottom of the ocean, releasing even more greenhouse gases. As if that weren't enough, the oceans became anoxic, killing off most marine life. The land wasn't doing much better. Forests withered, insects disappeared in large numbers, and for a brief period, Earth might have resembled a barren, baking wasteland. And yet life came back. It always does. Slowly, over millions of years, new species evolved to fill the void. This extinction paved the way for the rise of the dinosaurs, but they had to wait their turn. Fast forward about 50 million years, and we reach the end Triassic extinction, around 200 million years ago. Dinosaurs were already on the scene by then, but they weren't dominant yet. They were just one group among many. The ruling reptiles of the time included a wide range of archosaurs and other oddities, as well as early mammals and amphibians. Then more volcanic activity, a lot of it. The breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea triggered massive eruptions in what's now the Atlantic Ocean region. This led to a sharp spike in atmospheric carbon dioxide, resulting in global warming, ocean acidification, and another round of marine extinctions. Roughly 75% of species disappeared, but this time the survivors included a certain family of bipedal reptiles with big teeth and tiny arms. The dinosaurs stepped into the gap, and for the next 135 million years, they absolutely owned the place. Until, of course, their own curtain call. The end Cretaceous extinction, about 66 million years ago, is the most famous of all mass extinctions, and for good reason. It's the one that ended the reign of the dinosaurs and paved the way for mammals, and eventually humans, to rise. The culprit? An asteroid roughly 6 miles wide which slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of several billion nuclear bombs. The impact vaporized rock sent molten debris flying across the globe and triggered wildfires, tsunamis, and a sudden drop in global temperatures. A thick layer of soot and debris blocked sunlight for months, perhaps even years. Plants died, herbivores starved, carnivores followed. When the dust finally settled, about 75% of all species had perished, including every single dinosaur that wasn't a bird. And just like that, the age of reptiles gave way to the age of mammals. Tiny shrew-like creatures that had lived in the dinosaurs' shadows emerged, blinking into the light. With the dominant predators and herbivores gone, these little survivors found themselves in a world of open possibilities. 5 mass extinctions. 5 world-shaking, species-shattering, silence-making events. Each one a kind of brutal gift. A cleansing fire that made way for something new. What's striking is how consistent the pattern is. Catastrophe clears the board. And then life plays a new game. A weirder game. A more diverse game. Always improvising. Always rebuilding. And always somehow moving forward. And maybe that there's something oddly reassuring in that. A kind of cosmic resilience. The idea that even when things fall apart, really fall apart, life finds a way not just to recover, but to innovate. So as you rest tonight, maybe picture the Earth not just as a spinning blue marble, but as a vast ancient artist, sketching and erasing, refining and renewing, painting over old lines to make space for new ones, always moving, always changing, always creating something just a little stranger than before. Imagine standing in the quiet aftermath of a global catastrophe. The skies have cleared after months of darkness. The fires have burned themselves out. The air is still, heavy with silence. What happens now? At first, nothing. The land lies barren, the oceans eerily still. Survivors, if there are any, are hidden, tucked away in burrows or deep-sea trenches, clinging to whatever scraps of stability remain. This is the moment between extinction and rebirth. A pause, a breath, and then, slowly, something extraordinary begins to happen. Life comes back. This might seem obvious in hindsight, we're here after all. But what's truly remarkable is how life returns after a mass extinction. It doesn't just bounce back with the same old faces, it comes back different, stranger, more experimental, and often more complex. This phenomenon has a name: adaptive radiation. It's one of evolution's most dazzling tricks. Picture a world where niches, those could be little roles that species carve out for themselves, are suddenly wide open. No more dominant predators hogging the top of the food chain. No more towering plants monopolizing the sunlight. No more competition for resources that have been locked up for millennia. In the wake of mass extinction, the evolutionary real estate market is wide open, and the first to move in get to shape the neighborhood. Let's use a gentle analogy. Imagine a bustling city where every building is occupied. Every cafe, bookstore, dentist's office, and noodle bar is filled with tenants who've been there for decades. There's no space for newcomers. Then one day, a massive storm sweeps through. It's devastating, yes, but when it's over, something curious happens. Entire blocks are suddenly empty. The next wave of builders, shop owners, and artists have a chance to redesign the city from the ground up. They don't rebuild the old businesses, they create entirely new ones. A sushi jazz fusion lounge, perhaps. A bookstore that only sells blank journals. A treehouse cafe with a strict no-shoes policy. In evolutionary terms, those are your marsupials, your flowering plants, your bats and birds and bees. Evolution gets creative when the usual rules are broken. Let's look at a real-world example. After the end Permian extinction, which wiped out over 90% of marine species and 70% of land species, the world was essentially reset. It took a few million years, no need to rush, but once things stabilized, entirely new ecosystems began to form. On land, early archosaurs emerged, the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and of course dinosaurs. In the oceans, new types of corals began to build reefs. Tiny planktonic creatures started to form the basis of new food chains. Even insects underwent a kind of renaissance. Life didn't just return, it transformed. Another powerful example is what happened after the end Cretaceous extinction, the one with the asteroid, the firestorms, and the demise of the dinosaurs. In the rubble left behind, mammals found their moment. Before the asteroid, mammals had been relatively small, nocturnal, and unassuming. They were the underdogs, hiding in the shadows of the giants, but once the dinosaurs were gone, those underdogs had a chance to shine. Within a few million years, a blink in geological time, mammals diversified into a stunning array of forms. Some became grazers, others became climbers, some took to the trees, others returned to the water. They grew furrier, faster, brainier. Eventually some began to use tools, form societies, and bound many millions of years later, start podcasts and bake banana bread during global pandemics. This isn't to say extinction is good or desirable. It's not something to cheer for, but it is something deeply woven into the fabric of life. Every major extinction has been followed by a period of exuberant creativity. It's as if nature, faced with a blank canvas, suddenly discovers a whole new colour palette. Take the rise of flowering plants. These late bloomers, quite literally, didn't dominate the landscape until after several extinction events. Before that, Earth was mostly a gymnosperm paradise. Cycads, conifers, and ferns ruled the botanical world. Then in the Cretaceous period, flowering plants appeared. And after the dinosaurs checked out, flowers flourished. Today, over 80% of all plant species are flowering plants. That's your daisies, your apples, your oaks, and orchids. And they didn't just make the world prettier. They transformed ecosystems, provided food for pollinators, and helped shape the evolution of everything from bees to humans. Speaking of bees, insects are another great example of post-extinction resilience. While many lineages were wiped out in past events, insects as a group have survived every mass extinction. They were like the Swiss army knives of the natural world, tiny, adaptable, and often underestimated. After each wipeout, insects diversified again, filling new ecological roles, forming new relationships with plants, and inventing bizarre new body shapes just for the fun of it. Well, not for fun, for survival, but still, it's impressive. One of the most curious things about post-extinction recovery is how uneven it can be. Some ecosystems rebound quickly. Coral reefs, for instance, have taken tens of millions of years to recover fully after certain extinctions. Forests, on the other hand, can sometimes re-establish themselves in just a few thousand years. It depends on the severity of the event and the resilience of surviving species and a bit of luck. And while it might sound odd, even fungi have their moment in the sun, or at least in the smouldering remains of the forest. After the asteroid impact 66 million years ago, fossil evidence suggests a spike in fungal spores. With so much dead plant and animal matter lying around, fungi were in heaven. They blanketed the landscape, breaking down organic material and helping recycle nutrients back into the ecosystem. You could say they were the first responders of the post-dinosaur world. Another key factor in recovery is what's known as ecological release. When dominant species are removed, it frees up resources for others to exploit. A species that was previously restricted to a narrow niche might suddenly find itself with access to abundant food, open territories, or fewer predators. This can lead to what's called an evolutionary burst, a rapid diversification that fills the empty space left behind. Think of Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands. Each species evolved a different beak shape to specialise in different types of food. Now imagine that on a planetary scale. One day there's one kind of mammal nibbling on seeds. A few million years later there are dozens, some digging, some climbing, some swimming, some howling at the moon. It's worth noting too that many of the creatures we think of as ancient, coelacanths, horseshoe crabs, ginkgo trees, are actually survivors of multiple extinction events. They didn't radiate wildly into new forms, but instead found stable niches and stuck with them. Evolution isn't always about being flashy or fast. Sometimes it's about being boring but reliable, and boring, as it turns out, can last for hundreds of millions of years. So as we drift through the long, quiet nights of Earth's history, it becomes clear that extinction isn't the end of the story, it's a comma. A pause, a moment of calmness before the music changes key. What follows isn't always predictable. Sometimes it's stranger, sometimes simpler, sometimes more complex, but it is always without fail new. And perhaps there's something gently comforting in that, in knowing that life, even after its darkest moments, has an almost stubborn tendency to return, not just to survive, but to explore, to imagine new shapes, to build forests from ashes and galaxies of biodiversity from the wreckage of the old. So if you're lying there tonight, listening to the quiet hum of deep time, just remember, the Earth has been through worse, much worse, and every time life came back, not the same but reborn. Let's drift a little deeper now, into the gears and levers of evolution itself. If extinction is the great editor of life's long story, then evolution is the tireless author, scribbling new drafts, doodling bizarre side characters, occasionally tossing entire chapters into the fire, only to start again with a slightly weirder plot. But here's a curious thing. Evolution doesn't always move at a steady pace. It's not a smooth, gradual stroll across time. In fact, it often lurches, stumbles, and leaps. Sometimes it meanders for millions of years with hardly a whisper of change. And then, all at once, it bursts into action like a fireworks display of innovation. One of the best explanations for this odd tempo is a theory called punctuated equilibrium. It was proposed in the 1970s by paleontologists Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldridge, and it's a wonderfully sleepy-sounding phrase for something rather exciting. In essence, punctuated equilibrium suggests that species tend to remain relatively stable for long periods, what we call evolutionary stasis. And then, when circumstances change dramatically, evolution speeds up. New species appear quickly, at least in geological terms, and old ones vanish. It's not a gentle progression, it's a series of jolts. A long silence followed by a sudden solo. And what better jolt than a mass extinction? Mass extinctions are like clearing the chessboard mid-game. All the strategies that worked before no longer apply. The same rules exist, but the players are different. The pressure is different. And evolution, bless its chaotic little heart, takes the opportunity to shake things up. Think of it like a scientific pressure cooker. In normal times, evolution works at a simmer. Tiny genetic mutations accumulate slowly, nudging species along bit by bit. But in the wake of an extinction event, the heat is cranked up. There's less competition, more ecological space, and an urgent need to adapt. Suddenly traits that might have been irrelevant or even disadvantageous become the golden ticket to survival. Let's imagine, for example, a small lizard living in the underbrush during the age of dinosaurs. It's quick, clever, and has an unusually strong grip with its hind feet. Nothing fancy, just a quirky little climber. Then the asteroid hits. The dinosaurs are gone, the forests burn, the skies darken, but our scrappy lizard survives. Maybe it lived in a burrow. Maybe it ate insects that were still plentiful. Whatever the case, it makes it through. Now, in the post-extinction world, that strong grip becomes incredibly useful. As forests return, trees become essential habitat. Predators are scarce, competitors fewer still. Our lizard's descendants spread, diversify, and eventually evolve into a whole range of new species. Some climb higher. Some develop gliding flaps. Some even learn to soar. Millions of years later, they might become flying lizards or birds. That's punctuated equilibrium in action, a period of quiet stability, followed by a rapid burst of change when the world shifts underfoot. Another fascinating evolutionary phenomenon that often emerges in the aftermath of extinctions is the bottleneck effect. This happens when a population is dramatically reduced in size, often by a catastrophe. The survivors may represent only a small slice of the genetic diversity that existed before. As a result, future generations are all descended from this limited gene pool. Now, you might think that sounds like a bad thing, and it can be in terms of vulnerability to disease or environmental changes, but it also creates a kind of evolutionary bottleneck that shapes the future in specific and sometimes unexpected ways. A famous example comes from humanity's own past. Genetic evidence suggests that around 70,000 years ago, the human population may have gone through a severe bottleneck, possibly due to climate upheaval, volcanic activity, or other unknown factors. The number of humans may have dropped to just a few thousand individuals, and yet it was from those survivors that all modern humans descended. That bottleneck may have pruned the evolutionary tree, but it also defined its shape. Traits that happen to be common among the survivors, perhaps better memory, greater adaptability, social cohesion, were passed down through the generations. And here we are, all of us distant cousins from a small group of very lucky, very resilient ancestors. These evolutionary pressures also bring us to another key concept: convergent evolution. This is when entirely unrelated species develop similar traits in response to similar environmental pressures, and after extinctions, when ecosystems are being rebuilt from scratch, this happens a lot. Take the case of ichthyosaurs, dolphins, and sharks. One is a reptile, one is a mammal, and one is a fish. Yet all three evolved sleek, torpedo-shaped bodies, fins, and similar swimming styles. Why? Because those shapes work really well in water. Nature isn't reinventing the wheel, she's just finding the same solutions to the same problems, over and over again. After mass extinctions, convergent evolution can go into overdrive. New species emerge in vacant niches, often echoing forms that once existed but are now gone. It's as though nature, when faced with a similar puzzle, comes up with familiar answers, even if the characters and tools have changed. This is why we sometimes see what are called ecological equivalents. For example, after the extinction of large carnivorous dinosaurs, mammals evolved saber-toothed predators to fill a similar role. They weren't related to the dinosaurs, but they served the same purpose in their ecosystems. It's a bit like when your favourite coffee shop closes and another one opens up in the same location. New owner, different decor, slightly more expensive muffins, but still serving espresso to the neighbourhood. Life does that, it fills the gap. And this is one of the great, quiet truths of extinction and evolution. Life doesn't simply return after a wipeout. It responds. It adjusts. It takes the raw material of survival, DNA, environment, time, and it shapes something new. Not just a copy of what came before, but a remix, a variation, a new verse to the same ancient melody. Let's not forget the role of luck in all this. Evolution is not a perfectly calculated system. It is deeply dependent on chance. A genetic mutation might be useful or it might be meaningless. A species might thrive in one environment and perish in another. The survivors of extinction events are not always the strongest or the smartest or the most majestic. Sometimes they are the smallest, the shyest, the ones that happen to be in the right burrow at the right time, and once they make it through, the evolutionary dice get rolled all over again. The game starts fresh, with new players and new stakes. So when we think about evolution after extinction, we shouldn't picture it as a rebuilding of what was lost. It's not a restoration, it's a reinvention. And reinvention is messy, it's unpredictable, but it is also somehow deeply hopeful. Because at the heart of every mass extinction lies not just destruction, but potential. A blank canvas. A stage reset for new performances, new costumes, new scripts. And perhaps that's the most quietly beautiful lesson of all, that life, for all its fragility, is also endlessly resourceful. It can falter, it can stumble, it can collapse entirely, but then, from the smallest surviving sparks, it rises again, reshaped, refined, and always ready to surprise us. As you rest tonight, maybe you can imagine yourself as one of those sparks, a survivor of your own quiet storms, carrying within you not just the memory of what was lost, but the possibility of what might still be. Let's dim the lights on the Mesozoic era and settle into one of the most famous stories extinction has ever told. You probably know the headline, "The dinosaurs ruled the Earth, and then a giant space rock ruined everything." Cue the smoke, the fire, the screaming. Exit stage left. 160 million years of dinosaur dominance. But there's far more to this story than just an asteroid and a few unlucky lizards. It's a tale of cosmic chance, quiet survivors, and the strange dominoes of fate that, very indirectly, led to the rise of mammals, and eventually to us. And it all starts with a bang. About 66 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period, Earth was bustling. The continents were mostly in their modern positions, flowering plants were thriving, and dinosaurs were everywhere, not just the famous ones either. Sure, you had your Tyrannosaurus rex thundering around North America, but there were also duck-billed hadrosaurs, horned ceratopsians, armoured ankylosaurs, and towering long-necked sauropods. In the oceans, mosasaurs and plesiosaurs patrolled the depths. In the skies, pterosaurs soared like leathery dragons. It was in many ways a golden age. Then came the rock. The asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs is estimated to have been about 6 miles wide. It slammed into the Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater, over 110 miles wide and 12 miles deep. The energy released was equivalent to more than 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. Let that sink in. One object no larger than a city caused a planetary-level catastrophe. The immediate effects were devastating. The impact ignited fires across continents, sent shockwaves rippling through the crust, and blasted molten rock into the upper atmosphere. Within minutes, a global rain of red-hot debris. Debris began to fall. Forests ignited. Animals were scorched. The skies darkened as ash and sulphur filled the air. Then came the long, cold night, with the sun blocked by a dense layer of dust and soot. Photosynthesis ground to a halt. Temperatures plummeted. Food chains collapsed. Herbivores starved. Carnivores followed. The world's ecosystems, delicately balanced and interdependent, unravelled like threads in a tapestry. It is estimated that around 75% of all species went extinct during this event. On land, all non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out. In the oceans, plankton populations crashed, sending shockwaves up through marine food webs. Even plants suffered as sunlight disappeared. But here's the twist. Something survived. Crocodilians made it. So did turtles. Certain birds managed to hold on. Yes, birds are technically dinosaurs, the only lineage to make it through. And then, in the shadows, quietly chewing on seeds or insects, the mammals emerged. Now, mammals weren't new. They'd been around for over 100 million years, living modest lives under the feet of dinosaurs. Most were small, nocturnal, and not particularly remarkable, but they had some useful traits: warm-bloodedness, fur, the ability to burrow, a fondness for eating just about anything. Traits that, in a post-apocalyptic world, made all the difference. When the asteroid hit and the world changed overnight, the dinosaurs, with their large bodies and high energy needs, had nowhere to run. But mammals, they were already used to staying out of sight. They could live on scraps. They could raise their young in dens. They could adapt. This is one of evolution's stranger truths. Sometimes the winners are not the mighty, but the meek. In the years following the extinction, mammals began to diversify. With the dinosaurs gone, the world was full of empty ecological roles. There were no giant herbivores anymore, no apex predators, no one monopolizing the trees or the ground or the open plains. It was a free-for-all, and mammals were ready to explore. This expansion wasn't instant. It took millions of years, but from those small survivors came everything from whales to bats to elephants to primates, and eventually one upright ape with a curious brain and an appetite for exploration. But let's not race ahead just yet. Let's spend a little more time in that quiet, broken world after the impact, because here, in the shadows of extinction, is where some of the most interesting evolutionary experiments began. For example, many of the early mammals that thrived after the asteroid impact were generalists. They didn't rely on one specific food source or habitat. They could eat plants, insects, seeds, even as small animals. This flexibility was crucial. In a world where specialized dinosaurs had lost their niches, adaptability was key. Some mammals became excellent climbers, others took to the water, some evolved larger brains, better senses, or complex social behaviors. The evolutionary engine, freed from old constraints, began to rev. And mammals weren't alone. Birds also exploded into new forms. With their dinosaur cousins gone, they took over the skies in spectacular ways. From tiny songbirds to massive flightless terror birds, avians explored every corner of the globe. It's tempting to think of the asteroid as a villain, and in many ways it was. It caused incredible destruction. It ended lineages that had survived for tens of millions of years, but in doing so it also set the stage for something new, something different. Without that rock, the dinosaurs might still be here, which admittedly would be very cool, but it also means that mammals and humans might never have had their chance. Think of it like a forest fire. It destroys the trees, yes, but it also clears the underbrush, cracks open seeds, and creates space for new growth. The loss is real, but so is the opportunity. This doesn't mean we should romanticize extinction. It is, and always has been, a deeply painful process. For every species that rises in the aftermath, countless others vanish forever. But evolution doesn't dwell, it moves forward, it uses what's left. And in the case of the dinosaurs, their legacy didn't end at Chicxulub. It lives on in every bird, from the penguins of the south to the sparrows outside your window. It lives on in our bones too, in the mammalian traits that bloomed only because a door was violently shut. So next time you see a pigeon strutting around like it owns the city, remember, it is, in a very real sense, the descendant of a T-Rex. The swagger is justified. The Cretaceous extinction wasn't just an ending, it was a dramatic pivot, a rerouting of life's trajectory. And as you rest tonight, maybe you can reflect on that. That even in the face of total collapse, life has a way of weaving something new from the remnants. From fire comes light, from endings, beginnings, and from the ashes of the dinosaurs came the soft footfall of a very quiet, very lucky mammal. Let's take a moment now to appreciate something quietly miraculous. The sheer unlikeliness of you, of us, of the fact that you're lying in bed right now listening to this soft-voiced monologue about extinction and not being chased through ferns by a particularly grumpy carnivorous lizard with banana-sized teeth. Because if things had gone just a little differently, if an asteroid had arrived a few minutes later or earlier, if a mammal ancestor to Earth had been 1 degree less adaptable, if the climate had shifted in a slightly different direction, our branch of the evolutionary tree might never have sprouted at all. No stories, no stargazing, no sleepy science chats. But here we are, and the reason we're here has everything to do with extinction, specifically the kind that cleared the way for mammals to thrive, diversify, and eventually give rise to a clever, social, upright ape with a curious mind and a fondness for snacks, science, and staying up too late. To understand how extinction made us possible, we need to rewind the tape of life just a bit. Past the asteroid impact 66 million years ago, past the last T-Rex and the first timid mammals scrambling for safety. Let's land somewhere around 65 million years ago, when the planet was healing, the skies were brightening and the evolutionary playing field was wide open. In this brave new world, mammals began to evolve quickly, not because they suddenly became better or smarter or more ambitious, but because the field was clear. The ecological roles once dominated by dinosaurs, giant herbivores, swift predators, even as tree-dwelling insectivores, were now vacant. Evolution, ever the opportunist, nudged mammals in every direction. Some stayed small and scampered. Others got larger and started browsing the fresh regrowth of plants. Some took to the trees, developing grasping hands and keen vision. Others burrowed or learned to swim. But it was in the treetops, among the leaves and branches, that something extraordinary began to stir: primates. Primates are the group that includes monkeys, apes, lemurs, and eventually us. What makes primates special isn't just that they're clever or that they can use tools, it's that they were shaped from the very beginning by a need to navigate complex environments. Picture an early primate leaping through branches, judging distances, spotting fruit, avoiding predators. That life demands coordination, intelligence, and memory. Over millions of years, primates evolved larger brains, better depth perception, and more flexible hands. They also began to live in groups, which introduced a new evolutionary puzzle: social dynamics. Who's in charge, who gets the best fruit, who's friends with whom. This social complexity encouraged the development of communication, cooperation, even empathy. Fast forward to around 7 million years ago, and one group of African primates began to walk on two legs. Why? There are lots of theories. Maybe it helped them carry food, maybe it kept them cooler in the sun, maybe it just freed up their hands to do more interesting things. Whatever the reason, bipedalism set our ancestors apart. From there, the story of humans is one of increasingly powerful brains, increasingly complex tools, and increasingly elaborate societies. We developed language, art, fire, agriculture, science, bedtime podcasts, you get the picture. But at every step, extinction was there, shaping the path. Take the hominins, our early human relatives. There were many species, not just one: Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and others. Some were tool makers, some spread across continents, but all eventually went extinct except for one: us, Homo sapiens. Why did we survive while others did not? The reasons are still debated. Some scientists point to climate adaptability. Others highlight our capacity for cooperation and storytelling. Whatever the cause, the result is clear. Every other human species vanished, and in their absence we inherited the Earth. Once again, extinction didn't just eliminate, it cleared space. It allowed one particular lineage to take root and flourish. And as humans grew in number and power, they began to alter their environment in ways no species ever had before. We domesticated animals, we built cities, we altered landscapes, we created medicine, machines, and mathematics. And in doing so, we began to shape evolution itself, not just our own, but that of other species as well. Dogs, for example, evolved from wolves not by natural selection, but by partnership. We fed them, sheltered them, and in return, they guarded us and kept us company. Their evolution became entwined with ours. In a strange way, we became an evolutionary force. And this brings us to a sobering point. The very process that allowed us to exist, mass extinction, may now be one we are causing. Scientists warn that we are currently driving species to extinction at a rate many times faster than the natural background rate. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, overhunting. These are not ancient asteroid impacts or volcanic eruptions. They are human activities. We are perhaps the first species with the power to cause a mass extinction, and also the first with the power to stop one. This is where the story takes a thoughtful turn, because if extinction made us possible, what might our responsibility be in return? It's easy to think of extinction as something that happens to other creatures in distant times, dinosaurs, trilobites, mammoths. But extinction is happening now, today, all around us. And every species lost is a thread pulled from the great living tapestry of the Earth. But it's not all gloom. There are reasons to hope. Conservation efforts have brought species like the California condor and the black-footed ferret back from the brink. Protected habitats, sustainable practices, and global cooperation can make a real difference. And education, softly whispered, lovingly shared, plays a part too, because the more we understand our place in this long winding story, the more we can write the next chapter with care. So here we are, modern humans at the end of a very long road, paved with extinction, adaptation, chance, and resilience. You, listening in the dark, are the product of unbroken survival stretching back over 3.5 billion years. You are stardust, shaped by disaster, refined by struggle, and softened by time. And perhaps, as you drift off tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that your very existence is part of the greatest comeback story life has ever written. We are, all of us, children of extinction, made not just despite life's darkest chapters, but because of them. Let's take a dreamy detour now into one of the most delightful consequences of extinction: weirdness. Because if there's one thing extinction guarantees, besides loss and renewal, it's that life will come back in forms stranger and more surprising than before. Evolution, when given a blank canvas and a few million years to play with, doesn't just rebuild what was lost. It goes wild, it gets creative. After a mass extinction clears the ecological stage, evolution doesn't sit around mourning the old cast. It holds open auditions, and the characters that show up are often the oddballs, the misfits, and the unexpected stars of the next act. Let's start by visiting the aftermath of the end Permian extinction, the worst extinction in Earth's history. This event, about 252 million years ago, wiped out over 90% of marine species and about 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. It was, in every sense, apocalyptic. The air was thick with carbon dioxide, the oceans had lost their oxygen, the planet was hot, unstable and deeply inhospitable. And yet, out of that devastation emerged a truly bizarre batch of creatures. One of the most notable were the Dicynodonts, stocky pig-like animals with beaks and tusks. Despite their unglamorous appearance, they were incredibly successful, thriving across the globe in a time when most other animals were still figuring out which way was up. Then came the rise of the archosaurs, a group that would eventually give rise to crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. But before those familiar faces arrived, early archosaurs were wonderfully odd. Some had long limbs and walked on tiptoes. Others had sprawling postures like modern lizards, but were experimenting with more upright forms of locomotion. Evolution was throwing ideas at the wall, sometimes literally, and seeing what stuck. One of the great joys of post-extinction life is just how many oddities emerge when ecosystems are rebooted. When the usual rules are suspended, evolution has space to test unusual strategies. Sometimes these experiments are short-lived. Sometimes they lead to entire new kingdoms of life. Take, for instance, the Cambrian explosion, which, although not tied to a mass extinction in the strictest sense, followed the quiet, microbe-dominated Precambrian era. It was as if life had been keeping a low profile for billions of years, and then, bam, a sudden change of biological creativity. Strange, soft-bodied creatures like Hallucigenia, with its spiny back and upside-down appearance. Opabinia, with 5 eyes and a vacuum cleaner trunk for a mouth. And Anomalocaris, a top predator that looked like a cross between a shrimp, a manta ray, and something from a dream you'd rather forget. These creatures didn't survive the long haul, but they show what evolution can do when it's given freedom and a deadline. Fast forward to another extinction event, the end Cretaceous extinction that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, and you get another wave of evolutionary eccentricity. Mammals had been small and nocturnal for tens of millions of years, but now, with the dinosaurs gone, the mammals went, well, a little bit nuts. Consider Indracotherium, a relative of the modern rhinoceros that stood over 16 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed as much as 20 elephants. Or Andrewsarchus, a wolf-like predator with hooves, or Basilosaurus, a whale that looked more like a sea serpent stretching over 60 feet long. Some early mammals returned to the sea like the ancestors of modern whales, dolphins, and manatees. These creatures had once walked on land but evolved to swim, echoing the path fish had taken in reverse hundreds of millions of years earlier. Their flippers, streamlined bodies, and tail flukes are all examples of evolution's ability to retool existing parts for new environments. One of the most delightfully odd outcomes of extinction, however, lies not in the animals, but in the plants and fungi. After the asteroid impact 66 million years ago, fossil records show a dramatic rise in fungal spores. With so much dead material covering the Earth, fungi had an absolute feast. It's known as the fungal spike, and it suggests that Earth may have looked and smelled like a damp compost heap for several years. And then there's the phenomenon known as the fern spike. After large-scale destruction of plant life, the first flora to return are often ferns. Hardy, simple and fast-growing, ferns thrive in disturbed environments. In the fossil record, an abundance of fern spores is often a sign of ecological reset. It's nature's green flag after a red light catastrophe. These post-extinction pioneers don't just fill space, they create it. Fungi break down dead material, recycling nutrients. Ferns stabilize the soil. Both make it possible for forests, grasslands, and complex ecosystems to re-emerge. Even insects have had their odd moments in the sun. After the Carboniferous period around 300 million years ago, Earth's oxygen levels were much higher than today. This allowed insects to grow to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans of over 2 feet soared through prehistoric skies. Millipede-like arthropods as long as small cars crept through the undergrowth. This wasn't due to extinction per se, but it's a good example of how changing conditions, especially in the wake of dramatic events, can lead to evolutionary extravagance. And speaking of extravagance, let's not overlook the cephalopods. These brilliant tentacled beings have reinvented themselves time and time again. After each extinction, they seem to return weirder and smarter. From ancient armoured nautiloids to modern-day octopuses, they've mastered jet propulsion, camouflage, and problem-solving, all without a backbone. Why so strange? Well, after an extinction, the rules change. With fewer competitors, organisms can evolve into forms that might not have succeeded in a more crowded world. There's room to grow, to experiment, to fail and try again. This is one of the great, quiet miracles of extinction. For all its loss and grief, it opens doors. It invites novelty. It encourages risk-taking. Species aren't just replacing the old ones. They're reimagining what's possible. And sometimes the weird becomes the new normal. Birds, after all, are living dinosaurs with hollow bones, feathers, and the ability to migrate thousands of miles with an internal compass. Platypuses lay eggs and have electroreceptors in their bills. Tardigrades can survive in space. Life, left to its own devices, refuses to be boring. Perhaps the best part is that we are part of this story too. Humans may seem fairly normal, we're symmetrical, warm-blooded, we walk on 2 legs, but think about it. We cook our food, we build cities, we paint cave walls and write lullabies, we explore the stars and study the atoms. No other species does quite what we do. And none of this would have been possible without extinction. Not because extinction is inherently good, but because it's part of the engine that keeps life dynamic. It clears the board. It gives evolution a reason to rethink. So as you rest tonight, floating gently in the silence of this thought, remember that weirdness is not the exception, it is the reward. The quiet, marvellous outcome of life starting over, again and again, and in the stillness that follows every great loss, evolution whispers something new into the dark, something wilder, something stranger, something wonderfully alive. Let's take a quiet breath together and open our eyes, not to the distant past, but to right now, to this moment in time where we find ourselves not as quiet observers of nature's long story, but as active participants in it. We are not just watching the sixth mass extinction unfold, we are playing a starring role. Now, before we go any further, let's set the tone properly. This isn't about doom and gloom. There's enough of that in the world already. Think of this more like a calm late-night fireside chat with deep time looking over our shoulder and evolution gently sipping tea in the background. Yes, we're living in a challenging time, but we're also living in a time of profound awareness, a time when we know what's happening and we know what's at stake. So, are we in the middle of a mass extinction? The answer, with increasing scientific consensus, is yes. Many researchers believe that Earth is currently experiencing its sixth major extinction event, this time not caused by an asteroid or a supervolcano, but by one of its own inhabitants, us. The numbers are sobering. Species are currently going extinct at rates estimated to be between 100 and 1,000 times faster than the natural background rate. According to the United Nations, around 1 million species are at risk of extinction, many within the next few decades. These include mammals, birds, amphibians, fish, insects, plants, fungi. Every major branch of the tree of life is feeling the strain. But it's important to remember that this isn't just about animals with sad eyes and conservation hashtags. This is about ecosystems, the interwoven networks of life that we rely on for clean air, fresh water, fertile soil, pollinated crops, and, yes, even stability in our climate. Take insects, for instance. Not exactly the poster children of extinction awareness, but quietly essential to the way our world functions. Bees, butterflies, beetles, and even flies play critical roles in pollination. They help produce the fruits, vegetables, and nuts that feed not just us, but countless other creatures. A decline in insect populations, already being observed in many parts of the world, could have cascading effects on food systems, wild plant life, and entire ecosystems. Or consider coral reefs, often called the rainforests of the sea. They cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but support an estimated 25% of all marine species. Rising ocean temperatures, acidification and pollution have already caused widespread coral bleaching, turning vibrant underwater cities into ghostly white ruins. If trends continue, we could lose most coral reefs within this century. And then there are amphibians, frogs, toads and salamanders, among the most threatened groups of vertebrates on Earth. Their porous skin makes them sensitive to environmental changes, and they're being hit from all sides: habitat loss, pollution, disease, invasive species, and climate change. Some biologists consider amphibians the canaries in the coal mine for planetary health. Now it's tempting to think of all this as something happening out there, in rainforests, oceans, and faraway ecosystems we may never see. But the sixth extinction is not a distant drama, it's a home story. We are part of the biosphere, we are woven into the same web. Every extinction leaves a hole, and the more holes we create, the more fragile the whole tapestry becomes. That said, let's take another breath, because here's something remarkable. We know what's happening. We can measure it, name it, and, perhaps most importantly, we can choose to respond. Unlike the asteroid that struck 66 million years ago, we have brains capable of foresight. We have tools, we have science, we have stories, empathy, and the power to act with intention. In a very real sense, we are the first species in Earth's history to understand mass extinction while it's happening, and to have the means to stop it. And that, perhaps, is one of the most hopeful thoughts you could carry into sleep. Around the world, people are already working to slow, halt, or reverse the damage. Conservation efforts, habitat restoration, wildlife corridors, sustainable farming, rewilding projects, they are not just theoretical, they're happening now, and they're making a difference. The story of the California condor is a shining example. In the 1980s, there were just 27 condors left in the wild. Today, Thanks to careful breeding and reintroduction programs, there are hundreds. Still critically endangered, yes, but no longer teetering on the edge of disappearance. Then there's the story of the Mauritius kestrel, the black-footed ferret, and the Arabian oryx, all species that were once considered functionally extinct and have since made remarkable comebacks. These are not just numbers in a spreadsheet. They are living proof that extinction isn't always final, at least not when hope, effort, and good science intervene. And it's not just about individual species. Entire ecosystems can be brought back from the brink. The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park, for example, had effects far beyond the wolves themselves. It changed deer behaviour, allowed forests to regenerate, helped stabilise riverbanks, and increase biodiversity. That's the magic of the web of life. Pull one thread and the whole thing shifts, but reinforce it in the right places, and balance can return. Of course, the biggest challenge we face now is climate change. As the planet warms, habitats shift. Sea levels rise, weather patterns become more extreme. Some species can adapt or move, others cannot. Climate change acts like a magnifier, intensifying all the other pressures that drive extinction. But even here there is room for cautious optimism. Renewable energy, sustainable urban planning, reforestation, and community-led conservation are gaining traction. The Paris Agreement, imperfect as it may be, represents a global effort to coordinate action on climate, and younger generations, those inheriting this complicated, beautiful, troubled world, are more informed and more passionate about the environment than ever before. And here's where you come in. Yes, you. The person winding down for the night, maybe in your pajamas, maybe sipping tea, maybe already halfway to sleep. You are part of this story. The choices you make, what you eat, what you buy, what you support, ripple outward. But even beyond choices, there's the simple act of caring, of being aware, of noticing the birds in your garden, the bees on the lavender, the strange and wonderful mushrooms that appear after rain. The more we notice, the more we understand, and the more we understand, the better equipped we are to protect. So perhaps, as you close your eyes tonight, you can carry this thought with you. We are living through a pivotal moment in Earth's history. A moment of great risk, yes, but also of great potential. We have the power to decide what kind of ancestors we want to be, what legacy we want to leave. Extinction made life possible. It opened doors, created space, sparked innovation. And now, for the first time, life itself is asking us to consider whether we want to be creators or caretakers. You don't need to have all the answers, no one does. But the fact that you're listening, learning and wondering, that's already a beautiful beginning. And as the earth spins softly on into another day and the stars wheel silently above, remember this. Life endures not because it's easy, but because it's endlessly inventive. And in that great rolling ocean of adaptation and renewal, every ripple matters, including yours. And so we've wandered together through over 4 billion years of life's quiet courage, of extinctions that wiped the slate clean, and the wondrous, improbable blooms of life that followed, from trilobites in ancient seas to mammals scurrying beneath dinosaur feet, from fungal kingdoms rising after ruin, to the strange and fragile world we now call home. Extinction, for all its sorrow, has been nature's unlikely sculptor, removing, reshaping and revealing. It made room for flowers, for feathers, for songbirds and cephalopods, and eventually, for us. It carved out the space where human beings could arise, not in spite of loss, but because of it. And now, with sleepy eyes and a mind full of deep time, we return to the present, to a world full of both wonder and worry. A world where extinction is no longer just something that happens to forgotten fossils, but something we are witnessing and influencing. Yet within that truth lies something quietly empowering. Because unlike the trilobites or the pterosaurs or the mammoths, we understand what extinction is, we know its causes, and most remarkably, we can choose what happens next. You, dear listener, are part of a species that tells stories, plants trees, restores habitats, and dreams of stars. And whether you feel small or mighty tonight, your care, your curiosity, your choices, they matter. So before we drift off completely, let's return to where we began. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Is it still late where you are? Are the lights dimmed, the covers pulled up, the outside world hushed? Maybe it's just past 10 and you're unwinding after a long day. Maybe it's the gentle quiet of 3 in the morning and you're nestled in the timeless space between dreams and dawn. Wherever you are, whatever the hour, thank you for being here, for spending this time together in quiet thought and gentle learning. And if this journey through extinction has brought you even a moment of calm curiosity, I'd be truly grateful if you'd leave a like or subscribe. Not just for numbers, but because it helps send this kind of slow, thoughtful science out to others who might need a little calm tonight, too. Extinction may be the end of many things, but it is never the end of wonder. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with ancient oceans, quiet forests, and the whispering possibility of all that life can still become.